Okay, good morning. For those who don't know me, my name's Roy Wilsher. I chair the National Fire Chiefs Council, and I'm really pleased to, well, not be here, but be in front of you this morning, especially as we collaborate with our partners in the Fire Protection Association and the Institution of Fire Engineers. I think it's good to get back together and do this type of learning together. What I'm going to do this morning is take you through some of the building safety issues, the new regulations, the fire safety bill, etc., from our perspective in National Fire Chiefs Council. You will hear from colleagues later on during the day as well, but here's an overview from how we see it. One of the things I want to do is introduce our protection unit, our new protection reform unit that's been created recently. We've had a building safety team for a while who have been working with CLG and the Home Office on the new regulations, but following some welcome investment from government, particularly from Home Office, we've now set up a dedicated team which is filling up with experts led by Dan Daly. Now, the purpose of that team you can see on the screen, but it's really two ends, both inward looking and outward looking, really. Outward looking to government and other partners, giving professional and technical advice, working on the new bills that are going through, working on things like building remediation, supporting fire and rescue services across the country in how they deal with fire safety issues, but also looking forward to the future. Those who know the National Fire Chiefs Council and Fire and Rescue Service know we have national operational guidance. We're looking to introduce national protection guidance, where we've already set up a fire safety competence framework. We're looking for regional work in those things that fire service don't do by themselves very often. So enforcement, legislation, prosecution, fire engineering. So we're very much looking not only to the now, to the problems we face now, but also to the future. So, the capability and competence of fire and rescue services going forward, because all those things we know apply to the fire and rescue service as much as they apply to anyone else involved in building safety and fire safety. So moving on, these won't be new to you. These are the things we're dealing with just at this moment, whether it's the new fire safety bill, fire safety order, the building safety bill leading to the building safety regulator, the building risk review I will talk about a bit later, and simultaneous evacuation, waking watch, also major issues. What I haven't covered there are the many other things that have gone on and we have been involved in. So the Hackett review, we were involved in every one of the work streams, building remediation, the ACM and cladding scanning, the change to the approved document B and the combustible ban, all the other plethora of work that's going on in building safety. We are working hard, as many of you are, to really overcome decades of building safety failure. And I won't put it any softer than that. Just what we see around us resulting from Grenfell and what we see around us now in all sorts of areas is decades of building safety failure that we are all trying to deal with. So let's move through those one at a time, shall we? If we look at the fire safety order, we've done our consultation response, the fire safety bill. We'd like it introduced all in one go, and I think that's now been agreed. I also feel that it shouldn't be introduced without proper guidance and professional guidance for those who might have to apply it. So looking at some particular issues there, the non-worsening clause, that's been an issue for us as an FCC and previous in our other guise as the Chief Fire Officers Association, is that this fact that you can have a major refurbishment, major change, something going on to a building, but you didn't have to upgrade the fire safety issues that went with it. We want to see that throughout this bill and the building safety bill. Of course, the Grenfell inquiry recommendations, we fully accept the spirit and principle of those recommendations, but as Sir Martin Moore-Bick said himself, it's got to command the support of those like us, like the fire service, like yourselves, who have to implement those recommendations. So we're working hard on that. But also this thing about life safety, property safety, what comes first, what should be engaged. We want it both. So a major property loss can affect people's lives, can affect local communities, can affect other things. So life safety, yes, comes first. Property safety, really important as well. So, and we want that, that new power, that enforcement, that prosecution. I was talking to someone just yesterday about, you remember the Better Regulation Task Force, when back in the 2000s, we as regulators, fire and rescue services, were encouraged not to prosecute people. We were encouraged to support and guide and educate, not take enforcement action. Things have changed, and we want the powers to do that. We did say back in 2017, after Grenfell, that powers we had at our disposal, the Fire Safety Order and the Housing Act, were never written, were never drafted for the problem, for the incident that now faced us. So the strengthening the order, the new building safety bill, we really do commend and appreciate. A couple of things in there as well, particularly the front doors to apartments or flats in high-rise residential buildings, and external wall systems. Those of you who know the Fire Safety Order know that it's legislation built in, embedded, sees its genesis in health and safety. So that applied to workplaces, which in strict terms in residential high-rise buildings applied to the caretaker's office or the staircase. But even then, the protected staircase, our argument always was that the front door to apartments came under the Fire Safety Order, because fire safety, Jack and John, 2-door protection to a staircase. One of those doors was the front door. Now, that wasn't always agreed by government, Home Office, but that is now being clarified. The Home Office also say that bringing external wall systems is also a clarification. Now, we welcome the fact that external wall systems will be included, and we will be looking at that very hard as we go forward when the new bill is and the new order is introduced. But then moving, there's the I suppose you could call it the sister. It might be the big sister legislation of the Building Safety Bill, a significant piece of legislation that's now going through its consultation stage. It's been to committee stage. I was fortunate enough to give evidence on behalf of National Fire Chiefs Council. But it is, as I say, a significant and major piece of legislation for all of us, not just looking at fire safety, but safety in buildings and bringing in the control of building control, the regulation of building control, all those things. So what we're pleased to see, the bits we're really pleased about the Building Safety Bill, are its flexibility, an enabling piece of legislation so it can be expanded at a starting point. And we know where the government has chosen to start in residential buildings over 18 metres or 6 floors and above, those explanations. But we're pleased that it can be expanded. We're pleased with the levels of competence and scrutiny and the changes that we make to planning and building control functions. The oversight of a new regulator, we think that's the right thing to do as well. And really placing duties on those responsible for the buildings. We must never forget that safety in these buildings is the responsibility of people who own the buildings, and it's responsibility of people who build and maintain the buildings to build, maintain and refurbish them properly. And also they're more focused on the needs of residents. I'll probably talk about residents a bit later when it comes to simultaneous evacuation, wake and watch and things, but we must never forget the residents, and we will never forget those bereaved and survivors and relatives from Grenfell. All those residents in all those buildings, many of which still have aluminium composite material with an unmodified polyethylene core on the side, but other building materials that should never have been on the side and should never stay on the side of many buildings. As ever, we don't agree with everything. We agree with most of it, but not with everything. This National Fire Chiefs Council. I think one of those things is the scope of the new Building Safety Bill. Now, since the Hackett Review and since the The fact that high-rise buildings over 18 meters are immediately equated with high risk is not right in our view. High-rise does not necessarily mean high risk. Height can be a factor, but so can many other things, like the state of the building, how it's built, how it's maintained, the occupancy. So we would like that scope almost immediately extended to places where vulnerable people reside, where people who might need assistance in evacuating reside. So we're talking about care homes, hospitals, those sorts of things, sheltered houses, those sorts of areas. Personal emergency evacuation plans, PEEPs, are an idea. Very difficult to keep up to date, we feel, when you take into account sports injuries, the effects of drinking drugs, refusal to move, all those other things. But if there's a known disability and a known reason, we do support those. But where are vulnerable people, and also that property protection? Also, there's some need for clarity. There's going to be a lot of secondary legislation and frameworks coming out here. There's still no clarity on some of the overlapping provisions of the Housing Act and the current fire safety order, future fire safety order. So how are those going to be dealt with? And those roles and responsibilities. Yeah, we very much welcome there'll be extra responsibility on people in the UK for buildings, but how do we interact between the responsible person under the order, the accountable persons under the bill, the building safety managers? Where do responsibilities and accountability start and stop? And also, if we go into a national framework, if the power we ask for powers of direction, that's fine, but they should be done in consultation, particularly with fire authorities. If you have your own risk-based inspection program in a local fire authority, the powers of direction might skirt or steamroll right over the top of that. So that needs to be considered. So fire authorities should be consulted on any of those strategies. So sum up, we really do welcome the new bill. We would like to see a better clarity in these areas, but we're working very hard with CLG and Home Office and other partners to get this just right. Health and Safety Executive in particular, we're running the shadow regulator. We're working very hard to provide them with as much professional and technical support as they need. So moving on, a couple of things. Cost. Cost to leaseholders in all sorts of ways. Our position being, if it's regular maintenance, like you might expect, or regular upgrades that you might expect, like grounds maintenance in a block of flats, that's fine. But let's not make leaseholders pay for the mistakes of others. The people who make those mistakes, the people who include the shoddy work, the people who don't understand fire safety, and we've unfortunately seen quite a lot of that recently, even in the inquiry. Don't make the leaseholders pay for their mistakes. And then again, as I say, we're working with the HSC, but how do you, and that's quite a long word on that slide, operationalise that whole work how do you work with building control, local authorities, fire authorities to make sure it works together? How do we interface? How do we run those multi-agency teams? Still unanswered, but lots of work going on to try and bring some clarity. So let's move on to, you may have heard of the Fire Protection Board. It was a board I was invited by Nick Hurd when he was Fire Minister to chair. It's joint governance between us as NFCC, the Home Office and CLG, local government association as well. And what it's been set up with, we've talked about, we used to talk about 11,500 high-rise residential buildings in England. We've now worked out it's about 12,700, but we get more come out every time we do the data. This was just how risky are these buildings? I've already talked about high-rise not equaling high risk. So how do we get the baseline? So what is happening? We are looking at all the high-rise via the fire and rescue services in England. Now that might be the fact you've done an audit there in the last year, so you don't have to go back again. The fire crews have been down recently and it's particularly low risk. but you might identify some that you're a bit worried about as a fire and rescue service, or if you're a fire and rescue service with only 20, 30 or 40 high-rise buildings, you might go and audit them anyway because you have the resources to do that. My not concerned, but my support goes out to somewhere like London. Over 6,500 of these high-rise buildings are in London alone. So dealing with those, we think we calculated to go and audit each of those might take between 4 and 8 years, depending on the audits. We're trying a bit more of a pragmatic approach. We started on phase one with the ACM3, the non-modified core ACM, and visited all those to ensure the mitigating circumstances were there to make sure people could still live in those buildings. So that's been completed by Fire and Rescue Services. We're now on the second phase, which is all the other buildings. We've got a lot of data come from MHCLG. Interestingly, so far, even in the data that's come our way, we've put 265 buildings back as out of scope. Either they're not tall enough or they're a different type of use, and have included an extra 140 buildings that Fire and Rescue Services knew about that CLG hadn't been informed about by local authorities. So we really are on course, including all the buildings in London and Manchester and other big conurbations to be done by December next year. Hoping that data and that review will set a really good baseline for the new building safety regulator and give some assurance to the residents in high-rise residential buildings across England. One of the other very important things we've done recently is update the simultaneous evacuation guidance. Now we're now on our third edition. The biggest part about that is obviously the Waking Watch part. So you would have, I'm sure you would have heard about Waking Watch. Now it's not a new system, it's not a new policy, it wasn't invented after Grenfell, but we formalised it with partners, with the FPA and IFE and many other experts. But we did one of those unfortunate things, and this is something perhaps as a learning thing. We issued it first time around with only the National Fire Chiefs Council badge on it. So it became our evacuation guidance. And if you actually look at Twitter, it becomes my personal guidance to residents, which of course it's not. So when we first wrote this, we generally thought this will be for a short period. Yeah, it might be a year or so before remediation of ACM buildings. We did fear other cladding systems might cause us issues, but didn't know the extent of that. So there's been some changes. We engaged extensively with cladding groups, residential groups. So one of the main things, one of our main issues we're saying is that Waking Watch is expensive. It should not be your first port of call as fire safety failures in buildings. There's lots of other things under the consolidated advice note you can do to mitigate risk. Don't necessarily need a Waking Watch. And one of the first things you should do is a cost-benefit analysis, including a common fire alarm. Common fire alarm and a proper fire alarm that reaches all parts of the building is better than a Waking Watch. You're relying on a Waking Watch to warn you of fire. So you should be looking to install a fire alarm, even if it's only temporary, as soon as you can on that cost-benefit analysis, in consultation with residents. And there's a difference between Waking Watch and evacuation management. I probably don't need to tell this audience, but yeah, even if you get rid of all the Waking Watch, you might need a person to manage the evacuation, liaise with the fire and rescue services. Again, we're not saying you need to evacuate for everything. We have hundreds and hundreds of examples of small fires in buildings where you don't need to evacuate. But yeah, if you need to, it needs to be managed. One of the important things here, another important thing is both the Waking Watch and evacuation management can be carried out by residents, in our view, as long as they are trained properly. Like you have fire marshals in an office or somewhere else, that can be done by trained residents. Again, the cost should not fall at the feet of the resident. We've also done is some definition there on short-term, temporary, etc. But I would urge you to go and read that new guidance, and it's an important move forward. So that sums up my talk for the morning. I hope it gives you a bit of an insight on things we're working on and what National Fire Chiefs Council think about what's going on at the moment. You'll get a chance of Q&A. You'll get more presentations from NFCC during the day. We could be contacted by the website, but I hope we can talk again later. Thank you.